3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R., and joining me for this episode is Peter Whitley, National Director of MUFON for Japan. Peter, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Adam. How about yourself?
Doing wonderful. Glad to have you. Glad to have your time. I was just talking in pre-podcast about your website, which we're going to post in description so people could find. You have a lot of information, so it's
Yeah, I've been in the field for quite a while now. From my early years as an experiencer and the past 12 to 14 years as a researcher. So I've had time to get involved in several different aspects of this phenomenon. There's a lot to it.
Yeah, I see. Well, there's definitely a lot of parallels. I've always been fascinated by it. I personally have experienced nothing or witnessed nothing. But the fascination and the curiosity. And then, for me in 2017, when the military released their videos, I'm sold because you can't deny that,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that was really a huge milestone for the research community and for all of us interested in this. That really opened the doors wide open and lended a lot of credibility to it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people still don't believe in UFOs, which listen, after the videos and a lot of the evidence that's been portrayed over decades, you can't deny UFOs are real. Now, some people could argue we don't know what's behind the controls for obvious reasons, but you can't deny UFOs. And so,
absolutely. Yeah. At this point, when I come across someone that is just a complete skeptic, and I mean that in the terms of a debunking skeptic,
right?
I got nothing to say to them. Your eyes aren't open to it at that point.
Well, yeah, they're walking around with filters on, and they're not going to learn it's impossible to learn new things when you're walking around with filters on. It's
precisely.
So typically I open up by asking what put you on this path, but you're an experiencer, so I know that much. So let's start with the beginnings and the origins and what got you to MUFON. Let's walk that route.
Sure, yeah. I'm an experiencer. I'm what you might call a abductee. That's not the preferred term these days. We usually say experiencer, but I don't take offense to the word abductee in that I didn't consciously agree to be taken aboard a UFO at any point in my life.
Right.
I had a couple of instances, once when I was 17, once when I was 18, conscious abductions, you might say, where I was taken aboard a UFO. However, those instances didn't really get me that interested or involved in the field. From back when they happened, I knew they were real. I was open about them, would tell people about them. But it wasn't until I moved to Japan about 14 years ago that my eyes kind of really woke up to what was going on, and I decided to dive headfirst into the field and start researching it with enthusiasm.
Sure. To clear up a couple things with people, and this is for skeptics in particular, they say abductions are nonsense. And I want to be clear on something. Mm-hmm. We abduct all the time. Humanity abducts. We abduct animals. We abduct people. In the name of science, we do a lot of things. So don't think another higher intelligence wouldn't do this. And then for the people that are being abducted, like yourself, I'll tell you well, here's what it is. You're tagged. Right? When we study an animal in the wild, we tag it, we follow it, we re-abduct it again, we knock it unconscious, we test its blood, we see how it's coming along, we set it free, then we abduct it again when we track it down again for the same sort of tests. So this isn't out of the outside of the normal. It's some people have a hard time understanding, well, why would they do this? Well, now you know why. It's exhibited in human behavior all the time.
It just makes sense. Any species that would like to study another species would do so. Absolutely.
Indeed.
Absolutely. It just makes logical sense.
And I'm under the assumption it is too. And I try to base things on what I would do if I'm the alien and I'm traveling and I find another species on another planet and they're complexed and there's air. I can't breathe their air. So for me to do so, I would have to do a tremendous amount of experiments in order to make a hybrid system. And that doesn't happen in a lifetime. That's generations, maybe millennia to achieve that perfectly, no matter how sophisticated your intelligence is.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're not going to jump into the lion's den and start, studying the lions right there in the midst of them. You're going to take one out, bring them back into your environment where it's safe.
Right.
And where you can do some controlled, research. Look at them. See, what are these things called lions and whatnot? Absolutely.
So we'll start this off with your experiences. And there's some in particular I highlighted because I found it interesting. But let's start from your experiences, and we'll move forward to the point where you get to MUFON.
Sure. Yeah. When I was the first conscious experience I had, and I always try to be very clear with people. There's a lot of high strangeness, as you know, in this field. And experiencers often share some commonalities. They'll have, like when we talk about children, for example, that are suspected to be experiencers, they'll have frequent nosebleeds, periods of missing time. They will disappear from the house and such. And I had things like that as a child. But I try to clearly differentiate those experiences from the very material things I can grasp and say, listen, here is where I was abducted. And that started when I was 17 years old. I was laying in bed about to go to sleep one night, and a blue light came in through my closed window. It triangulated upon my bed, pinpointing right about at my midsection. At that point, after the light appeared, two what I now know to be small gray aliens materialized instantaneously next to my bed. One looked to be headed towards my bedroom door. The other was focused his or her attention on me, or its attention on me. And like anyone, I think would be, I was scared to death. And my first instinct was to jump out of bed. I think that would probably, it would either be that or hide under the covers, right?
Right.
So I attempted to jump out of my bed at that time. And I was, for lack of a better term, I was frozen, half in midair. Half of my body was coming off the bed. The other half of my body was still touching the bed. It defied all physics. I could tell at the time that these two entities in my room were surprised. There was no vocal communication, nor was there any overt telepathic communication at that time. But I could sense their surprise at the fact I was awake. The entity that appeared to be headed towards my door then turned its attention on me. Both of the entities then proceeded to move me and themselves via this blue light through the physically closed window of my bedroom. There were also blinds down at the time. We physically traveled through there. I had no sensation of movement whatsoever. I was still in a frozen position. We got outside of the window, and fortunately or unfortunately, I guess it depends on your point of view, that's where my memory of that specific incident ends. Now, the next morning, the first thing, of course, I woke up was the last thing I remembered was flying through that window. And I ran upstairs, of course, and I told my mother, who was upstairs reading the newspaper, hey, I think some aliens took me out the window last night. And she said, no, you're crazy. Years later, probably about 10 years ago, since I have this all happened in a matter of seconds probably, but it felt like a lifetime, of course. About 10 years ago, I visited a regressive hypnotherapist after I was into the field and I knew that people sometimes underwent regressive hypnosis in order to recover more memories. And I wanted to focus on that incident in particular. Over the course of about 2.5 hours, my hypnotherapist repeatedly, he took me back to the moments before it happened. He took me back to the morning after it happened. And I don't know if you or any of your listeners have ever undergone regressive hypnosis, but it's an amazing thing. You can recall details you would never remember in a million years. I could tell, where small items in my bedroom were. Long story short, though, that regressive hypnosis session just repeatedly ended up with me at the moment of abduction, sobbing like a baby on the poor therapist's couch. And after about 2.5 hours of this, he rightfully said, "Pete, I don't think this is going to help you if we try to investigate this incident further." So we quit. That's all I can remember of my first conscious encounter with anything like that.
A couple of things to that.
Yeah.
One that stands out to me. I hear a lot of times that people have experienced the Greys would be surprised by them being conscious through the whole thing. And one thing I'm finding that's common with you is the astral projections, right? So you have and this is kind of like we're fast forwarding to later on in the conversation, but we'll get back to that. But at this point, what I want to say is perhaps your ability to you have a different software, like all the human brain, the most complex computer on earth currently. It's all the same hardware, just different people have, different software. You have a different software. You have an ability. Perhaps when they were rendering you, because in my imagination, they're altering physics, right? They're going to stiffen your body. They're going to render you unconscious. Let's take them out there and tag them. Let's do our study, right?
Yeah.
In your case, your ability might have prevented them from knocking you completely unconscious, right? And
you very well might have, absolutely.
Right.
We know that we know through research there seems to be a genetic component to the abduction experiencer phenomenon. And part of that genetic component may be something in us, which, interferes with whatever they're doing, and they're interested in what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, because if you'll hear in other podcasts I do, especially with paranormals and afterlife, I think our consciousness and our soul, I think it's the same thing, just raw energy. And
absolutely, I could not agree more. I'm so glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, because I spoke with Tony Civiaelli about this, and I'll make that introduction to you with that. But there's a pattern there, right? So now humanity, let's talk about humans. We come across a kid who's got remarkable abilities. The first thing's going to happen is one of our 3-letter acronyms are like, how do we use this for our government? Let's take this kid. Yeah, let's take this kid. We got to study him. That's exactly what would happen. So
yeah.
So anyhow, let's move on to your next experience.
About 6 months later, I had turned 18. In this incident, I awoke on board what I assumed to be a craft. Now, I think when it comes to things like this, of course, like I aforementioned, my mother saying, "Oh, you just had a bad dream." A lot of people that aren't experiencers may say, "Okay, you tell me you awoke aboard what you think was a ship. How do you know this wasn't a dream or a nightmare?" Which is an excellent question. I 100% stand by that line of thinking. We need to be skeptical and look at all possibilities. The way I describe it is as such. I've lived in Japan for 14 years. Japan, we have a lot of fault lines here. We experience earthquakes with some regularity. I would say a couple a year. Wake me up in the middle of the night, for instance. Now, if an earthquake occurs in the middle of the night and I wake up, the next morning when my alarm goes off, I don't think to myself, did I dream there was an earthquake last night? Right. I know there was an earthquake last night. I woke up in the middle of an earthquake. There's a qualitative difference for most of us in dreams and reality, I believe. There are people that suffer from sleep paralysis.
Sure.
and things like that, which is a different phenomenon. But there's a qualitative difference. And that's why I can say with authority, I awoke aboard what I believe to be a ship. So with that out of the way, on this occasion, I awoke. I was prone, lying on what I assumed to be a platform or a table. There was what I now know to be a tall gray alien to the right of me. Once again, I could tell without any communication, this entity was surprised. However, this time he communicated with me. He had in his hand a long metal rod. It was about the diameter of a pencil. It was completely silver. It appeared to be metallic. It was maybe roughly 12 inches long. I did not see anything on either end of the rod. It was just symmetrical all the way. And he telepathically communicated to me. He said, I'm going to insert this into your ear. It will not hurt. I'd again like to, if I could make an aside, that when we discuss telepathic communication with extraterrestrials or visitors, whatever you'd like to call them, typically, and in my case as well, this telepathic communication isn't in words.
Right. It's like a knowing.
Yeah, exactly.
And to support that, eventually we're going to have Neuralink, right? Elon Musk, where it's in the beginning to help heal people for brain injury, but ultimately you'll be able to have what they say, a knowing. You'll communicate with people, just no words, nothing, just you'll know. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we're very close to this already, you know. And if you're to presume that these entities are, at the very least thousands, if not millions of years more advanced than us, it's absolutely no stretch of the imagination what's going on there. So yeah, he imparted to me that he was going to insert this rod into my ear and it wouldn't hurt. I was still frozen. I was frozen. He did insert that long metal rod all the way into my ear, which defies all explanation because this rod was longer than the depth of my head. But he inserted it into my right ear. It did not hurt. He told the truth. I will give him that.
Yeah.
He retracted this rod from my ear very quickly after he inserted it. And he imparted something to the effect of, you're going to go to sleep now. You won't remember this. However, once again, of course, the first thing in the morning was that I, instantly, last thing I remembered, oh my God, this tall alien thing put something in my ear. And the first thing I did that morning was, instead of running upstairs, there was a bathroom next to my bedroom at the time there in the basement. And I went into that bathroom and I kind of gingerly put my finger into my ear, just swirled it around, just, wow, that was odd. I don't know what I expected to find. But what I did find was a small amount of dried blood on my finger. And now this is also, I think, counterintuitive to a lot of people, because we're talking about what we, I think, can safely assume is a very advanced technology. Why would it leave blood or a marking of any sort? But what I now know, having been a member of MUFON, the Experiencer Resource Team, for a number of years and studied it for well over a decade, is that there are physical traces. That happens. It's just another one of those strange paradoxes.
I mean, of course, listen, you're talking about a sophisticated intelligence. It doesn't mean they're perfect. They're going to make, so here's what I gather from what I'm hearing. This is my own assessment, by the way. I speak nothing from science, just what I assess. So they downloaded data from you. You're a test subject, and they needed data to collect, and they collected it. And if I say this often, when you look at the brain, I worked in radiology for a number of years, some time ago. When you look at the human brain in imaging, its structure is that of what I say a computer, like remarkably close to what a sophisticated computer should look like. And you can see there's reception there. You could have reception. So when they speak telepathically to you, it's not impossible that they have like their own Neuralink. And an example would be if you were to shoot a sound wave at someone's skull with, data attached to it, it could potentially bounce around in there with the right receptor. You could pick up data.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's, that's in part, that's what I think. Because I'll tell you what, to support what you're saying, I do a lot of off podcast interviews.
Yeah.
One gentleman's a scientist, and it has nothing to do with space or anything. His science is nutrition. And he works in a hospital, which I'm not going to disclose his information. I'm going to respect his privacy. But what he told me in his experience, same thing, near what you're telling me, except the way he explained it to me was so nonchalant because he works in the medical field. He's like, I'm a subject. They needed data. And that's it. Because the ability for them to care about me is only so much as to keep the data going. That's their main, that's their only motivation to care about me is because they need that data. And when he said that to me, it gave me pause. Like, holy shit. I never thought of it that way,
In a lot of ways, I envy the way that his mind works because I think that's a very good way to think about it. Absolutely.
Yeah, he didn't have any. He has no pushback. The people would push back, and I've discussed this with Kathleen Martin. It seems to me that people would push back, or alpha people, like officers or military guys, or just people who are not used to surrendering who they are. They're used to being in control.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a big factor. But I think you're a subject and they're collecting data.
I do too. Absolutely. And I think what you said was very poignant. That their interest in us as individuals, I think, probably goes so far as to the data collection and whatever the end goal of their research is. There was no emotion involved, they weren't cruel to me,
right?
But it was a very clinical process, just like a scientist might perform. Absolutely. It was a science experiment.
I watched a documentary many years ago where they were observing these chimps, and they would shoot one with a dart. They'd only collect the one, and they would take samples and data from this chimp. I don't recall the reason why. I was young when I watched it, but the point I make is that's exactly their ability to care about these animals. They're like, don't let anything happen. Although they might emotionally care, but their main motivation was, we can't let this die. We had the studies been going on. We got to come to a conclusion. That was their main motivation. So,
I don't, people, various experiencers, there's so many different takeaways that people have from it. But I tend to side with you and the gentleman you were talking about. I feel that I don't feel that they blessed me as a star seed or anything like that.
Right.
I do my best not to disparage anyone's individual experiences.
No, of course not.
The things I talk about sound crazy to many people that haven't had them happen to themselves. But I don't feel, in my case, they weren't giving me a gift of any sort like that.
Right.
It was a clinical procedure for some end goal, which as of yet, I think I cannot quite grasp.
I'll tell you what. Here's how I am. As a human, and I have a subject I'm studying. It's an important subject, right? Yeah. And there are some people like they feel intimate connections with their their observers. Well, I can answer that, right? Or at least here's how I think I can answer that. If I have a subject and it's giving me some pushback, I'm like, listen, no, I really care about you. All right. Well, now let me get the swab, right? Because that's what you have to do. You have to make the subject comfortable. Because a stressed animal, and when we observe animals and they're stressed out, we're not getting good data because their behavior is altered because of something we've done. We have to make them comfortable in their environment and in ours.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. And I think in a case like mine where there's no pushback, and I'm up there just confused and just not a willing, but I'm not fighting back as a participant. There's no need for that. There's no need for them to do that. They can go about what they need to do without, having to coddle me. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's different though. Because if I ever wake up, I'm on a table and there's some aliens, I'm going to tell them, like, listen, before you move forward, what do I get out of this? You guys got all this intelligence. Like, I am a willing participant. If make me smarter, make me taller, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm a negotiator, absolutely. So that's just who I am.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we can get to that later. But eventually when I came to the astral projection point. That was the reason I did it, is because at some point you want answers. Yeah.
Well, of course.
I've had one more conscious abduction.
Sure.
This occurred after I became interested in the field, after I was fairly well versed in it. This was about 7 years ago. I should say, as I mentioned before, I live in Japan. I've lived here for 14 years. I was born in the United States, relatively rural part of Washington State. The abduction experiences at 17 and 18 occurred there in my family home. About 7 years ago, when my now 8-year-old son was just under a year old, we went back to Washington State. My parents had since moved back to their hometown in a different, but still rural area of Washington. And we were staying there over the Christmas holidays. My wife, my son, and I. Once again, I awoke in the middle of the night on board what I can only assume to be a ship. This time was quite different, and this experience it's not unique, but it's more rare in terms of what happened. At that time, when I awoke, seated across from me was my infant son. He was aboard the ship with me. And he was sitting eye to eye, which meant, and I could see, he was seated in what, the only way I can describe it is it looked like maybe an alien baby chair, a high chair,
right,
where you sit a child at a table. It was white or off-white, seemed to be molded to his form, and he was seated across from me eye to eye. First thing I saw when I awoke. An interesting note about that experience is that he had a huge grin on his face. He was absolutely delighted. And he greeted me telepathically aboard this ship. And this is something that I still struggle to explain, but I'm sure you and your listeners will understand. When he greeted me, it was a telepathic, just greeting, as if like a knock, but a telepathic greeting. He greeted me in a way that felt adult. It was not a baby's acknowledgement of, oh, hey, there's that guy that feeds me and changes my diapers.
Right.
My infant son was seated across from me, and he gave me a greeting that was almost as if it was, like his soul or his consciousness acknowledging the fact that I was there. And that kind of threw me off for a minute because that was very strange. In between us was a basketball-shaped sphere or globe floating. Inside this sphere was what looked to be a liquid or a gas, and it was purple. It was undulating. It was very similar to when you see like a time-lapse photo of the sun, and we see, the fire swirling up there, right? All that plasma and such. And basketball-sized sphere, purple gas or liquid or something inside there. To the right of me, to the left of my son, again, was a tall gray. And the tall gray addressed myself. And what he imparted was, he told me, if you agree to this, there was no elaboration as to what this was. If you agree to this, you and he was referring to my son, will understand each other's souls. So one difference in this encounter and the two when I was younger is that I was not terrified. I wasn't afraid at all. And I'm not sure what to attribute that to. Part of it may be that my son was there and happy. Part of it may be that at this point, I was well versed in the reality of these experiences, or it may be something they had done to comfort me. I don't know.
You know,
Go ahead.
It makes me wonder, hearing this, I have my own kind of thoughts or like hypothesis or theories about what the soul is. And, you'll hear me say this in previous podcasts. I'm sure a lot of people listening here say, oh, here he goes again. I think when we die from here, when we pass from this world, our energy, it either gets recycled here because one, you were a bad person and you got to start over, or it gets recycled because you're great and we need you here, or you just, your energy goes to the next plane. Did they figure out a way to download the consciousness? That's what it sounds like to me almost, right? Like it's pre-programmed.
Yeah. And in my more recent experiences with astral projection, they've communicated that to me explicitly. Yeah. And so at that time, however, I was not an astral projector, had no experience in that realm. And so I sat there in just utter confusion. I had no answer for this tall gray, right? I don't know what I'm agreeing to.
I got to tell you something else too. I hear this a lot, mostly in the off podcast interviews from the people of experience. Typically, the entities are always on the right hand side.
Yeah,
is that common?
It's common in my research as well. Yeah, not only in my experiences, I've heard a lot of the same thing, and that's another oddity that I haven't heard a great explanation for. But
right, I mean, like me. Not throughout the duration of the whole thing, but initially when they take notice, it's on the right-hand side.
Yes. Huh. And we'll talk later. My astral projection experiences, they're always on the right side of me. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I wonder why that is. So, it's going to make now down a rabbit hole I go.
Right. Me too. Hey, if you get any answers, please let me know, Adam, because I would love, this is one of those, there's a million things that puzzle me, but some of the ones that I can maybe grasp a bit as to what is happening. That's one of the ones that I wonder, maybe that's something I can actually understand. So at the time I didn't know what to do, but apparently that was enough to agree to the procedure, because this tall gray, he did something imperceptible to this sphere of purple light or liquid or gas. He didn't move. There's no motion, but I knew that something was done to this sphere. Immediately after that happened, my son and I shot down, eyes wide open. We shot down from what seemed to be lower Earth orbit. We shot down through the atmosphere, through the cloud cover, through the roof of my parents' home, and landed in my bed. So here's another oddity about that experience, which, although I knew it was real, just further cemented it in my mind. When we arrived, my son was sitting on my lap. He should not have been on my lap. He should have been in his bed.
Right.
He was sitting on my lap, and he had that same huge smile on his face, as if he'd just, undergone the most enjoyable carnival ride an infant could possibly be on.
Right.
So I picked him up off my lap, I put him in bed, and I went back to sleep. Not much you can do after that. You would think perhaps that maybe your adrenaline would be, in fight or flight mode.
Right. So you had no chemical response then?
Not at the time, not when we arrived back. But I'm glad you said that, because after all three of those experiences, the morning after, I most definitely had a biological response where I felt like I was in fight or flight mode. Absolutely. Immediately upon waking, after all three of the experiences I just detailed, my body was electric. And I felt that electricity a multitude of times back when I lived in America, but without conscious recollection of abductions before those mornings. I leave those out of the narrative because I couldn't tell you what happened.
Yeah, there's a guy I'd spoken to off podcast, Southern guy.
Yeah.
And he's an older gentleman. He's probably in his 70s. And what he told me is, he told me about his experiences. He had a lot of them. And so I took notes. And I asked him, I'm like, well, why didn't you, like, you ever get angry or like you freak out? He goes, yeah, in the beginning. He goes, yeah, man, but now it's just like it's Tuesday. I'm like,
Yeah. Absolutely.
So he's gotten to a point where it's like, what? They haven't killed me. So, oh, well.
you get to that point, yeah. And when we talk later about the astral projection stuff, sometimes I'll be telling people about experiences with them, and I often will say, and it's the truth, I'll say, at this point in the experience I became bored. Yeah. And their response is like, how on earth are you bored if you're on a UFO communicating with an extraterrestrial or whatnot, witnessing these magical events? And it's like, well, you just like that gentleman said, it's a Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
listen,
something you've seen a bunch of times.
When you're a kid, you're afraid of the dentist, and by the time you're a teen, you're just like, oh God, I'm here again.
Great analogy. Yeah, that's exactly what it feels.
When it comes to, at some point, you can only be terrified of something so long until you're like, oh, again. Now it's you're taking up my time. So precisely. At some points, it just feels like it's a waste of time. Yeah. Discussing this, what you said earlier, and so I try to make people aware of this. Like I watched the gimbal video, I watched the video from the Tic Tac, and then I hear from experiencers how they're moving to and from places. It seems non-physical. You got to believe this, or at least at some point come to terms with they're manipulating space-time. You're not, so from their ship to your bedroom, you don't know what plane you're in. It's not in the realm of our physics, right? They're diverting that. Same with like the Tic Tac and these other things that are performing these amazing things with. Not only are they performing amazing, but there's no they're not breaking the sound barrier. There's nothing physical there. They're manipulating space-time. Plain and simple.
100%. And we already understand, going back to Einstein and the space-time continuum, we as humans already understand that this is a very real possibility of the universe we live in. And yet skeptics or debunkers will still get stuck on the fact that, how can this possibly move so fast and dart in and out? We're already on the cusp of discovering this, right? It's the space-time continuum. All points in space and time are connected. We're not that far away, in my opinion, from being able to manipulate spatial and time.
We're getting
there ourselves to that degree.
You got Elon Musk and people like Elon Musk and younger generations like an Elon Musk who think way outside of the box. We're not going to, I predict in the next decade, we're going to know, not just know more about extraterrestrial life, it's going to start changing science, what we read in school. That's coming,
Absolutely. What we're witnessing is just, these are all test cases, that if we're smart enough, we'll study them well enough to where we can begin to approach at least some level of technology where we can do some of these things on our own. It would revolutionize the world. It could possibly save the world in terms of energy usage.
A couple of things. One, with your son being on board with you. So when you say that to me, here's what comes to mind.
Yeah.
I love Big Cat Diaries. That was my favorite show ever. They documented that. So when they would study a leopard, it would birth a daughter, then they would follow that daughter, and then that would birth a daughter, and that's how the series went. They followed that bloodline.
Yeah.
Same thing. You're under observation. They're going to study you. Your son's next. That's just, and listen, they haven't killed you, right? So,
right? I fear nothing in terms of their involvement with me.
So here's the other thing too. Eventually, like we were discussing earlier, the whole Neuralink or products like it that are coming. Because if Elon's making it, someone out there's like, we got to do the same thing. Social media.
Absolutely. Oh, and if it's public, there's probably
advertising,
private stuff that's far beyond what he's talking about on Twitter.
Of course. So here's how it goes. We get to that point where there's a knowing, right? You're communicating with a knowing. There's no words. At that point, I say this a lot. When we get there, race won't matter, religion won't matter. None of that will matter. You're a species because now you're seeing that individual for what they are. You're seeing their energy. And you're realizing the ability to separate yourself from people by identity and belief systems won't make sense anymore. And that's when our visitors will definitely start the line of dialogue with us.
That's a great point. And to me, that's one of the most important implications of the very fact that they have the ability to communicate with us telepathically. It breaks down that distinction, not only between race, country, and creed, but between individuality, right? You begin to realize, I believe there's a paradigm shift with many experiencers where you begin to realize, wait a minute, we are all intimately connected, so connected. In fact, there may be the flimsiest of distinctions between me and you as individuals.
Right. I'll give you an example. I'm guilty of individuality as a kid, especially. Race never applied to me. I went to school. So one of my good friends in middle school was this guy, Aaron Turner, right? Black dude. We called him Maine. Yeah. And he got a pair of Jordans. And I was like, those are cool. And then, so here's where the individuality comes into. I need a pair of Jordans that are better than his, And so you go out, you save money, whatever, you get a pair of Jordans and you go to school to flaunt it on them. In return, he sees those Jordans like, well, now I need to get a better pair than that guy. And so, so even as something as childhood innocence over shoes could translate to bigger issues down the road, right? And
it does. You're describing basically an arms race in terms of Nikes at a schoolyard level.
Exactly.
Right?
So then you amplify that times 1,000 and you see all these differences. So while I reference the innocence of childhood and then the abuses of the politics, our observers view that as the same thing because they're still behaving as individuals. They're not cooperating as a species. They're definitely not ready to speak with us yet, but we will observe them because they're really interesting.
Absolutely. And I think you and I and experiencers, others that, have listened to these stories and recognize that, people aren't lying, that these things have happened. At least a portion of the population, those of us realize that as a human species, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go.
Tremendous way to go.
Tremendous. I do see hope in that, shows like yours are becoming more and more popular. The topic of consciousness is something that's no longer taboo in the scientific world. So I think there is hope. But imagine if you were already on that level and then you look down upon us and you see just some artificial line between Russia and Ukraine, which appears to be nothing from their perspective. And we're murdering each other over it. It's just, we're crude animals in comparison.
Yeah. It's here's, you're talking about a country and I love America. Look, don't get me wrong, but we just get out of a pandemic. And in this state of Florida where I live, we have this pandemic. People are still kind of recouping from their recovering, right? Financially and mentally. And well, I don't know. Florida's like the I dare you to state. But anyway, they jacked the rent up out here crazy. A year ago, I looked at his property, $900 a month. Now it was like $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
So when you see things like that, you got to put in a question, like, how much do we really care about our people? Because all it is opportunity. We saw people from California and New York flooding here. We know they can afford these prices. And so let's punish the people that live there by jacking prices up. It's not even about the idea of the money. It's just, how dare you do that to people? That's horrible, right? And then they're like, well, it's part of industry. Like, I guess.
Could there have been a worse outcome from a global pandemic, something that you would hope we all experience and suffer through together? There are, on what timeline have we emerged where things are actually worse coming out of that? Instead of bringing us together, it tore us apart, and there are people exploiting it for financial gain. It's just ridiculous.
Scary. And so again, to the reason I say that, and I bring it all up, if you're an advanced species and you're traveling interstellarly, however you're doing it, whether it be manipulating space-time or flying around, in any case, you have to be in agreement as a species to do these things. These feats cannot be reached and measured by what we have going on currently. There's too much debate. Like when Elon goes to Mars and terraforms that place, do you think, when you look at the application, you know what you're not going to see in the application is the box for race, religion, or politics. That's not going to exist there. What can you contribute to this planet to make it a great place and make it work?
Absolutely. I mean, the bare minimum for entrance, if people talk about galactic societies and whatnot, and I have no idea if that exists or not, but the bare minimum for us to participate in some level on an interplanetary scale has to be that we collectively join together as one species and eliminate these artificial barriers.
Yeah, because you can imagine, like, do we take these humans with us to explore new places? Like, no way. They're still conquering each other. What if they find a weaker race somewhere, right? Another planet breathable like theirs. What would we do as humans? We'd take over. We'd set up shop. There'd be an Amazon there tomorrow.
Yeah, right. For all we know, I mean, I think a lot of us at this point know better, but for all we know, this is the only habitable planet we'll ever find. And we're destroying it by the minute, you know, and they're going to take us somewhere that's not ours. Yeah, how do you think we're going to act there? You know,
terribly.
We're burning our own backyard. What are we going to do when we go to someone else's?
Well, you look at corporate America, right? Corporate America. Like, if you found a planet, like we're already looking at a planet. I think it's like 40 million light years away, which to travel at our current technology is like 60 years, right? That's a lifetime, which is pretty feasible thing to do if we learn how to freeze ourselves. But let's say we go there. It's breathable air. It's beautiful like here. The first thing we're thinking over there is, how do we set up shop over there? Like, could we put a Starbucks over there? Like, you know, like,
how do we monetize it? Absolutely. How do we monetize
what currency are we going to use over there? We got to make sure it's ours. All right. Unfortunately, that's the way we think.
Absolutely. We're going to plant a flag. Yeah. We're going to plant a flag, you know, and we're going to plant that American flag up there on Mars as if this is somehow ours. It's backwards.
You know what's going to happen is one day we'll meet another, like our current observers, you know, let's be thankful. I'll tell you why. They haven't killed us, and they probably could have fold over 1,000 times. They're not here for resources, clearly.
Yeah.
So, and I say this because for me, before the 2017 videos were released, I was always fascinated. I wasn't always 1,000% believing. You know, I always made room for the belief, but after those videos, you're like, okay, our military's observing us. These things are performing in a way that should put us at a heightened sense of national security, and yet we're not, which means we have a greater understanding of what they are. So that being said, if you see these UFOs our military's observing, the question of there being extraterrestrial life or even an intelligence above us coming from somewhere is more than practical. It's in fact the only answer, because we don't have it. If we did, we would have flexed that technology on Russia so quick it would have blew your boom. We would have. The only real reason we don't get overly involved with the Ukraine is the threat of nuclear war. But if we had that technology where we could just shut their shit down, believe me, we're doing it, and we're not waiting either.
Absolutely. We know for a fact that it's not us. There's, you know, that I believe it's Robert Hastings wrote the book UFOs and Nukes. There's innumerable, countless reports of UFOs neutralizing nuclear bases, nuclear control systems. If we had that technology, Russia would have never crossed the border.
No, it would never happen. And if they did, we would have put an end to that real fast, fast. So it's, for me, after seeing those videos, it's not, again, you can't question UFOs. The real, and even meeting people like yourself. So the grays. And so I have my own theories on the smaller grays. I think they're an advanced biological robot with the consciousness upload. I think the taller ones are the biological ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so that being said, you observe how they behave, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's a long-term study. This has been witnessed for thousands of years, right? Yes. Thousands of years it's been spoken about, and yet not a single attack on us, which tells me we're one of many planets that they found with life on it. Because to collect data, you have to have other sources to kind of base it on.
Yes.
We're not the only ones out there. They have figured out how to move through space-time in ways we can't. Clearly, they're observing other places. And our technology is just getting to the point where we're finding these planets that are habitable. So, and we're barely seeing that. Understand that we're measuring that by data and then filling in the gaps with imagination. Let's be clear. Right?
Yeah.
Now talking about something they could move the way they can. They have a knowing of it. So they're collecting data amongst many proving worlds like Earth. And so that's the belief system I'm falling under currently.
Yeah, likewise. And I think there's, despite, and I've denigrated here humankind a lot already in our conversation, but despite that, they have not overtly quarantined us. They have not punished us. They have not eliminated us. We have done what seems to be irreparable damage to our environment. And yet they've continued to be relatively hands-off and benevolent, which says to me, there is something inherent in humanity, which is valuable to the universe, that they have spared us from maybe putting us out of our misery or putting us out of the picture in order to save the planet Earth. Right. There's something about us that's special. That says to me.
Yeah, it's more than likely our complex emotions, our ability to. I mean, look at us 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we the cars were driving around basically on wind up.
Yeah.
Fast forward in just 100 years, we have electric cars made by Tesla that are not only breaking speed records, but it's mind bending to think about how they're constructed. Right?
Yeah.
In 100 years.
And he's putting them on a rocket and sending them into space already.
Yeah. I mean look at
the amount of progress we've made is remarkable.
It's incredible. So, and people ask me often, like, here's another scary idea. If you look at ancient Greeks, and I speak about this a lot, but if you look at the ancient Greeks and the ancient Egyptians and the inventions they had and all the wonderful things they were doing, and then I watched this documentary and I'm like, why the hell did that stop? Where's all these inventions? Then I found out why. Rome marched in there with Catholicism, put an end to that shit real quick, right? That's it's against the God and blah, blah, blah. We're 2,000 years behind on technology. Imagine if we didn't have that intervention with our technological breakthroughs from ancient Greece. We'd already be interplanetary right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I went down, on my honeymoon, went to Egypt. We took a tour of all the spots up and down Egypt. Absolutely. You go into the Great Pyramid and you recognize you're dealing with something that, wow, this is someone or something was at a point, probably 12,000 years or more ago from what we now know that, this is something that we've lost. I hope we get back to.
I don't dive into conspiracy, but when you look at the Great Pyramids, there's no way man did that by themselves. That's crazy talk.
Absolutely.
Those stones are so it's one thing to see it on TV, and then it's another thing to learn about their weight, their dimensions, and to think to yourself, how the hell were they moving that around? How is that possible? How did they stack them like that? And then you view the types of pyramids all over the globe in different locations with a very common baseline structure. That was taught to us. We were taught, right? And all the ancients speak of these gods, and they came down from these fiery chariots and these stars, and then you have to, and then you look at common today UFO sightings where they're brilliantly, they light up. They're ionizing the air around them, however they're manipulating it, and then you circle back to, we built the pyramids. There's no way.
Yeah, no way, no way. Yeah, and like you mentioned, every stage of humanity describes this phenomenon to the best of their ability. And at the time, they don't have airplanes, they don't have things like that, right? They see a fire in the sky. I mean, what else is it going to look like but a god, right?
Well, yeah, we can only describe it based on what we know.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's just different interpretations of the same phenomenon, in my opinion.
Well, our observers they're, again, this is an intelligent race of beings, right? Or intelligent species. They recognize that in us. They're like, all right, what's an acceptable way for them to perceive us this year? Right?
Yeah.
In this millennium. How do we do this? Because they can alter perception. We do it.
Yeah.
We're not perfected yet, but we're getting there.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And that's the Jacques Vallée approach to it. It's that they approach us in a way that is palatable to our current sensibilities. And I think that's been the way it's been since the dawn of mankind.
God, I'm glad you said that. I have yet to read anything from Jacques Vallée. I'm taking this in chapters.
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn things on my own and then read others and then compare notes, right? Mental notes. And that's my next thing. I'm going to start reading Jacques Vallée's and all his findings and his discovery and his theories, because it's captivating, right?
Absolutely. I can't recommend him enough. He viewed the phenomenon. He was one of the first serious researchers that got away from what I think is completely the wrong way to view it, the nuts and bolts type style of analysis.
Right.
Decades and decades ago, he was so far beyond that. He was looking at it in terms of consciousness, in terms of the way they present themselves. He wasn't sitting there with a protractor and trying to figure out the angles and the speed at which these things dart in and out of space. There are valuable conclusions to be made from that. Absolutely. If we can harness that technology, it would absolutely revolutionize humankind.
Oh, indeed.
But if we want to talk about it from a phenomenological perspective and the hows and the whys, the nitty gritty of why they're here, we need to look at it from that larger, humanitarian view that he took.
Yeah, and they definitely can't share technology with us. I say that because everything we have, we found a way to use it against each other, right? GPS, it blew me away when I found this out, but GPS was around a long time, long before we knew about it. It was a military application, right?
Yeah.
The internet was around for a very long time before we knew about it. It was a military application. Everything that we find remarkable today stem from military applications.
Absolutely. All of these things, fiber optics, the whole thing.
All of it. Yeah. So then why not give us greater technology? Because we're going to use it against us. And it's horrible to say, but it's the truth. It started from mankind. We're like, wait, you could shoot a rock with this rubbery thing? I'm going to hit that. I'm going to hit that dude with it real quick and take over his block. That's just how we are.
Exactly.
It's unfortunate, but
sad state of affairs with that.
So let's move into the astral projection.
Yeah.
When did you discover that was a thing for you anyway?
Well, about going on 2 years ago, for the whole backstory of it, I'm a certified hypnotherapist. I went to university for counseling. I never went into practice with hypnotherapy, however, but I've been using hypnosis on myself for a good 20 years now. I find it relaxing. Some people meditate. There's a variety of ways people reach that kind of relaxed, altered state of mind. And hypnosis has always jived with me. It's always sat well. So, as I said, I've been using hypnosis, self-hypnosis, quite regularly, up to daily, in the past maybe 5 to 10 years. And I came to a point where, again, I was a bit bored with it. I love the practice of hypnosis. It's very relaxing. I was using hypnosis for the typical things people probably think about. Relieve stress, help with public speaking,
or just focus,
exercise motivation. Yeah, all of these things, right? But however, after about 20 years of this, quite frankly, my public speaking skills are okay. I'm no great orator, but all of these things that I was putting myself under for, I was a bit bored with it. Now, I was just at the point where I was using it for relaxation. But I missed that aspect of hypnosis where you have a goal, where you're doing something you can't necessarily do by other means. And so I began to look at adjacent fields. I knew that meditation, for whatever reason, just wasn't my thing. But as I opened my field of vision to what surrounded the hypnosis field, what I came across was the work of the late, great Dr. Robert Monroe, who founded the Gateway Institute. And I don't say this to endorse the Gateway Institute. There are a variety of means to achieve astral projection, but that was my introduction to it. When I began to listen to the Gateway Experience tapes, I recognized that Dr. Monroe used a lot of hypnotic techniques in eventually what that program leads you to, the state and out-of-body experience, the state of astral projection. I went through that program on my own. To me, I felt it was a bit slow, but that, like I said, that was just because I have about 20 years of hypnosis experience. When I found that the out-of-body experience was real towards the end of that course, I realized it was possible. The first thing and the only thing I thought to do with it was, if I can successfully achieve this state, this out-of-body experience, where my consciousness leaves my body, and seemingly I can visit places that are otherwise inaccessible to me in the physical form. My sole goal at that point was to go up there and visit with these extraterrestrials, or the visitors. I thought, I'm going to use this skill, technique, technology, whatever you want to call it, to go up there and visit. And so after going through the Gateway Experience, I kind of, I used a lot of the techniques he used, as well as the astral projection community. I made my own way to get up there, a more simple hypnosis type induction to achieve the out-of-body experience. And in last year, about mid-2021, I began what ended up to be a group of sessions that lasted exactly 40 in total, where I exited my body, field astral projection, and I visited and communicated with extraterrestrials and the visitors. Over those 40 sessions, I primarily communicated with 3 gray entities and 2 mantis type entities.
I wonder if they were like, what the hell? How did he do this? That would be my reaction.
It's a lot to take in for someone to hear this. And I think any of your listeners probably listening, this might be the point where I'm about to lose them.
No, but listen, real quick. So you understand, right? Here's how strong the consciousness and the energy or soul, whatever, your energy, right? It's energy. Yeah. And if I hear this exampled in people in dire situations all the time, that they leave their bodies to kind of leave like I've heard this from people in encampments and in prison and survival scenarios. You could separate the energy from your vessel. I mean, you have to be able to do that. Michael Jordan, when he was out, he was sick at a game. I was just watching the Last Dance on Netflix.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Great. I recommend it to everyone. He's there with food poisoning. He's like sweating profusely, sick to his stomach, and he goes somewhere mentally. Yeah. And he scores. There's the case of the guy that was stuck in the Andes, or I think it was the Andes, where the group of people that were stuck out there, and it was they literally go somewhere to leave that situation. Now, that when you're focusing what you're saying you're doing, and you're practicing this for many of years, I don't think anything's impossible.
No, absolutely. Like you said, that consciousness energy is so strong, and that's the key to it. And to address your question, which I think is a great question, is what do they think when I show up on the UFO, right? So I'll take you back to the first time. And now when I talk about astral projection, and I'm not the first person to talk about this, but in my opinion, the most important point is when you practice astral projection, intent. Intention is the key word. So the first session I underwent, where I put myself under to exit the body and visit a UFO, my sole intention was to communicate with an extraterrestrial. As I went under hypnotically, as I vibrated my body out, my intention the entire time was to visit with an extraterrestrial. And so we'll go back to that first, like I said, let's go back to that first session. I exited the body. My intention was to visit a UFO. When I exited the body, and this is a process that I still do to this day, the first thing I do is I look around the room. I look, where did I place my phone? Is there a Kleenex box here in the corner? Where are the objects located? I can't say submit myself because I'm there in my astral form, but I want a grasp of my surroundings. I want a form of lucidity where I can, keep myself present, understand that I'm out. Now, at that moment, as I mentioned, intent is key. There's no flying up through the roof, going up into space looking for a UFO. I simply do that check in the room. In my mind, I say, it's time to go visit. Boom, I'm there.
Right.
They're waiting for me. That conscious energy is so strong. They know as I undergo the process that I'm coming. That very first time I visited, I exited the body, did that check. Okay, it's time to visit a UFO. Boom. I appeared inside a ship. Now, I was confused. Don't get me wrong. I was shocked it actually worked. But I instantaneously appeared there, and there was a gray there as my guide. Intent. Intent is the key there. I think that's true for probably all astral projection. You could astrally project to do a million different things. Personally, I'm interested in communicating some form of two-way communication, which, as I mentioned before, was something that was lacking in my previous experiences with them.
Here's how this goes.
Yeah.
They could see your software, right?
Yes.
So you're selected. Even before you thought of astral projection, they knew, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
When the rod in the ear, for example, they collect data.
Yeah.
They have a marker for you now. Your energy's noted. Yes. So when you do it, they note your energy. They can detect it.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's just, and I speak this by, I use my imagination a lot. I try to, as you're explaining things to me, I'm seeing things I always try to put myself in a perspective of an alien. What would I do? Well, here's this guy. He's got a software download that none of the other people in his immediate area have. This is our study guy. Let's tag him. Let's watch him. And so as you project yourself and they detect you doing it, it's not, maybe they're not like, holy shit, what's this guy doing here? It's just like, all right, he's gotten there. He's figured it out.
Yeah, that's exactly what I believe is happening. That's exactly it. Something pings to them. I don't think it's a computer. But an analogy would be like, oh, boom, an instant message comes in. Oh, okay, here, Adam's instant messaging me. There he is.
Right. They
have some sort of ability to do that. They get that ping, and they know that I'm coming, and they greeted me.
Well, I mean, in other examples, and I said this in a lot of podcasts, a little kid back in, I think it was the 90s or the 80s, little kid remembering World War II. He was a pilot, not even a famous one, recalled every friggin' detail. So when you pass from here, your consciousness / your soul, your energy has data attached to it. Same with fiber optic cables. When you send information fiber optically, you're sending energy somewhere, and then that data is being retranslated to another computer to upload it. So when you pass on, there's still residual data attached to it. So when you astral project, in my mind, there's a data, there's a signature there. So of course they would recognize it.
Absolutely. And this didn't occur during the 40 sessions I conducted last year. I was a passive participant. And I say, what I mean when I say that is I would arrive on board a ship each time. And actually, one of the first times I arrived, um, one of the gray that greeted me telepathically asked me, "What would you like to see?" I had absolutely no idea. I don't know. What do you have to show me? Was basically my response. And that began a pattern where every time I would project, they would seemingly have one specific thing they wanted to either show me or explain. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but I will say that I've begun the practice again this year. And very recently, last week, in fact, I've been collecting a series of questions. My goal is I reached out to the community, the UFO community, the astral projection community, and I asked a question. I said, listen, I'm going to begin doing this again in 2022. I think what I'd like to do is go up there every time with the intent of asking a question. And the community, an outpouring of wonderful questions to ask them. The question I asked last week was, why me? Why am I able to do this? I want to say at the outset, I don't think I am special in terms of, I don't believe I have been selected by extraterrestrials to give some sort of message to humankind or anything of the sort. I don't think anyone can come to me for healing. I'm not special in that regard. But I do think, like you mentioned, my assumption was there was something in my software, if you will,
right,
that allowed me to get up there. And that was more or less their response. Their response to me was that, listen, before you were born, before your consciousness came into your physical body now on Earth, you agreed to be a part of this program, which included the abductions, which included this astral projection. They said, you previously agreed to do this. That's why you're able to do it. I think there are probably many, many, many more people that can do that. I don't think I'm special in this regard. I think it's just a matter of people eventually getting there on their own and discovering, oh, I'm a part of this program too. I can do it. And I think that probably includes the majority of experiencers.
Your DNA and your energy, one and the same, right? Because there's always going to be some attachment residually.
Yes.
Just like your son. Like I said about the cheetahs, the leopards. You're going to be so selection makes sense to me. There's something in the DNA, something with your downloads, your uploads. Why have I never witnessed anything or seen anything? I can answer that. I know full well why. I'm a pain in the ass. Because
that's probably why.
I mean, you get on board the ship with them, and your pushback's so minimum. Where me, I'm like, hold on, we got to talk about this. I have some questions before we move any further. Before you do anything else, what do I get? I would harass them. It's unfortunate.
Yeah,
it's just
absolutely, and it goes back to, like I said, those 40 sessions I conducted in 2021. I was a very passive visitor.
Yeah.
I was a very good boy when I was on board those ships. They had something to show me. I would ask questions. Sometimes they would basically say, listen, you're too dumb to understand. And I would just go along with it. I didn't fight back. Yeah. I think that's part of my DNA. That's part of my DNA. It's probably part of the reason they allowed me up there. They know I'm not going to cause any trouble.
It's true. Because I'm a negotiator. I first had to tell them, look, I don't need to go back. Here, what do you need for sample? I want to go see other planets. Let's go see some other planets, And to them, it's like, this is not how to study. There's left to right on the study, and you're screwing it up, man.
Exactly. They've been to those other planets. I think the last thing they want to spend their time on, if you or I are up there, is going to visit some planet they already know about.
Right.
They're interested in. They're interested in humanity. The ones that are here visiting us, watching over us, they're interested in the human experience, right?
Yeah.
They aren't our playthings. They aren't there to take us on a roller coaster ride to different planets.
Yeah, like, you want to see his resources to take you where now?
No, sorry, that's not a part of the program. Right. Listen, this is a give and take situation, I think.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, people, I hear this a lot. I'm sure you have too, and I've spoken about this on the podcast a lot because it aggravates me. We're compared to ants, right?
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah.
If we're walking in a wide open field, you and I, we see an ant pile, we look down and they're driving cars or flying planes. We're shutting that park down. That's understudy forever. We're going to see how that unfolds.
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. We found some special ants over here.
Yeah, we're not going to disregard them. I mean, at some point, if we could communicate and we learned how, we would abduct them. We'd do some experiments. We'd communicate. That's the facts. So we wouldn't disregard them. I promise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have something unique to us that they're interested in. Absolutely. You know, I don't like the analogy either. I think in terms of, if we're going to talk about, the analogy I like to make more is that we're more babies in comparison to them being adults.
Right.
And that's truly how I usually feel when I astrally project and visit them. I feel as if the things they communicate to me, the concepts, are quite frankly so advanced that I won't understand them. They dumb them down a lot. They use a lot of earthly analogies. They'll often disguise technology they have to appear as an earthly technology so that I can understand a bit better what I'm witnessing, you know?
Right.
So yeah, I don't think, you know, we're sentient, right? We have a consciousness, which is our soul. So we aren't, you know, a lower life form in terms of ants, but I do believe we're a less evolved species that they're dealing with.
Agreed. I mean, listen, have a guy from MIT sit at a table with a guy who likes pro bass fishing and have a conversation between them and see how well it goes. It's not going to go well.
Right. Exactly. And if the guy from MIT is smart, he's going to put it in terms that the bass fisherman can understand.
Right.
And that's the way they communicate to me.
Right. And they're not going to go into complex conversations about physics because one guy's like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, my son is recently into astronomy, right?
Right.
And and I'm no astronomer, right? But you know, I try to put the things into terms he can understand. You know, we have a poster of the constellations on his wall, right? It's like a stepping stone. You know, here are the constellations, and you see that this ram is actually made up of a bunch of little, what you would call suns, right? You know, we're dumbing it down a bit for our children. And I think that's the way they're communicating with me.
I agree. I mean, because you can't possibly comprehend what they're trying to express. It's not, that's in same terms. When we study the animals that we study, we can't express what it is we're trying to study and what we're doing. Because there's a gap there. They're going to be like, well, I just want to throw sticks. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right. And one of the things that I you know, they're benevolent. They're obviously very intelligent.
Yeah.
One of the things that always astounds me when I visit them, and over the 40 sessions I undertook last year, is that smartly there was a progression. They would introduce to me a simple concept. Like, for example, one of the first times I was up there, they showed me a small little capsule. Inside that capsule, I could see what I guess I would just describe as maybe strings of light dancing around, right? And my question, of course, is what is this? What am I looking at this? And the answer to me was, that's you. Not me as in Pete Whitley, but that's me as in a human. That's a human soul, right? That's the way they would begin to introduce things. That would be one session. They would show me, look at here in this capsule, this is a human soul. To us, this is what you look like on a consciousness soul level, right? And then later on, they would build upon that. You know,
this could be examples in therapy. The way you're speaking to like if you go see a psychologist, and you're having complex issues, whether it be emotionally or otherwise, they gradually give you solutions in small doses, because you can't give someone an enormous, here's your solution all at once. You're going to overwhelm them. They're going to walk out of that therapy session with more stress than they walked in with.
Absolutely, absolutely. And on my website, I journaled all 40 sessions last year. I continue to journal my sessions this year, and I'm slowly posting them on my website. I also post them on Reddit under an anonymous account, but everyone knows who it is at this point.
Right.
But yeah, the things that I found out in those later sessions would have probably turned me off the whole thing, the whole astral projection altogether at the beginning, had they showed them to me. It was just like therapy. They eased me into it. There's an ontological shock you're going to experience, and regardless of what you see. And I think they do their best to minimize that.
Yeah, you know who's an expert at doing things like that? Are the creators of video games, and they're
absolutely,
and the way they introduce character and how you build yourself, and when you got to start leveling up, it's all a gradual process in order to not overwhelm the player and gather their interest, and they can learn. It's a learning curve.
Exactly. It's classic. That's a perfect analogy. It's a classic learning curve. Yeah, therapists use it, teachers use it, video game designers use it, and they use it as well, right? Exactly. They are by definition, I believe, alien in terms that they don't reside here on Earth and in the form that we take as humans, but there's still that logical progression,
right?
Yeah, that they follow.
Yeah, there's got to be a stepping stool, because as human beings, even the most intelligent people here on Earth cannot process a lot of data at once. It's not possible. You got to digest things. I mean, I know I do. I consider myself a pretty smart guy for the most part, but when I get overwhelmed with information, I have to sit down, take it easy. I play music at 432 hertz, right? Like some Mozart or whatever.
Beautiful.
Right. Something that'll relax me. So this way, when I'm taking information in, I'm absorbing it. I'm not just reading it and learning it. I'm absorbing it. And that takes time, and you have to build to it.
Beautiful. I'm so glad you mentioned that 432 hertz thing, because the part of the way that I get up there is that I alluded to this before. I use a hypnotic induction to relax my body. Behind that hypnotic induction, I do have a 432 hertz tone playing in order to relax my body and get myself more in tune with nature, which, as you know, of course, as a musician that plays 432 hertz, that's the natural frequency.
Yeah. In fact, we didn't change it till like the 50s of 440 on average, and that was to keep people on edge with the idea that they would buy shit. And
I'm sure you've done this, but if your listeners haven't, you can go on YouTube and listen to side-by-side comparisons of 432 hertz tuned music versus 440 hertz tuned music, and the difference is striking. It's unbelievable, and you will not believe how the wool has been pulled over our collective eyes by using the 440 hertz.
It's true. Look, people could look this up. They changed that in the 50s, and I think largely in part to have people on edge, to keep people in a control factor. 432 hertz is a very relaxing tone, right? I would listen to that when I'm going to study something or I want to read something. I play 432 hertz, either piano, whatever music you want anyway. Even Bob Marley, I found it Bob Marley. And it relaxes you, and you could absorb it better. You could take information in, where at hertz that are higher, or like 440, it's distracting. And it slides you into that tone of those 30-second abilities to pay attention, which is really unfortunate. Like when I would shoot pool. Before a pool tournament, like when I go shoot pool, I just listen to music at 432 hertz, and in my mind's eye, I focus on what I want to do. Like I'm practicing on the table. I'm getting mentally prepared. So that's why I do it.
Wow, I'm so glad this conversation took this turn, Adam, because this is actually something that has never come up before in interviews or podcasts I've done. But to me, it's a very, very key part of the process, not only in what I do, astral projection, but just in our life in general. Like you said, there are so many applications of 432 hertz and just and music in general, tones in general, how they affect the body. Absolutely. Luckily, people are beginning to catch on.
I'm glad we are too, because we're in a world right now where 30 seconds is it. And we learned that concept from commercials that were geared to get your attention for 30 seconds. And it's been applied to in our phones, on social media. And it scares me because here we are, we're trying to get more proficient and be a little more intelligent and more accepting. And we're destroying our attention span, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, a lot of people, the reason I came forward with my story, I mentioned before, I've been very forward throughout my entire life that I'm an experiencer. I'm a member of MUFON. I'm on the MUFON Experiencer Resource Team. However, coming forward with the astral projection stuff was something I was very wary to do, because even though I've been deep into this subject for a long time, I felt like this was something that might possibly be the tipping stone that makes people quit talking to me. However, thankfully, it hasn't. And thankfully, it's opened more doors than it's shut. But when you talk about that 30-second attention span, a lot of people contact me and they want to learn how to do it. And I'm happy to tell people to do it. I'm not in this to make money. I sell nothing. I accept no donations. I explain exactly how I achieve my particular brand of astral projection in detail on my website. Anyone can do it, and I encourage people to do it. But one thing people need to understand is you have to get beyond that 30-second immediate gratification stage. And if there's one thing that is stopping the people that contact me that want to try it, is getting past that. You need to get past that stage.
Yeah, when you get these people like, is this going to be long? You know?
Yes, it's work. It's going to take you time, right? You're going to have to break these habits. And I'm not just talking about astral projection, right? We're talking about a lot of stuff, but you need to break these habits that, the commercial industry has forced upon us, for the past 70 years or more.
If you want to be great at anything, it's going to require applied time and focus. And believe it or not, for people like, well, I can't meditate. Well, you do. Why? Every time you play your video game, every time you want to make dinner, every time you set your mind to something, you're focused. And that's meditation, just intensely.
Absolutely. And that's, it's meditation and it's hypnosis. When, the first thing I tell people about hypnosis is, listen, you're in a state of hypnosis all the time. You drive down the road and you're in tune with a song. You're effectively hypnotized, right? That's the relaxation stage. You can do this. You do it unconsciously on a daily basis, right? Sure. But you need to learn how to apply that to other situations. And it will be immensely beneficial to your life in a variety of ways.
Of course. And listen, for people about projection, some people want to say people are crazy. All right. 10 years ago, here's where I was 10 years ago. If someone told me that you could astral project, I'd be like, no, that's crazy. But when you read about what our government, our 3-letter acronyms play with, there's a whole bunch of studies where they were like in and around experimenting with. And then there's this point where you get to the research where it's cut off. Yeah, because either it didn't work or they found something and we're not privy to it anymore.
That's exactly it. It worked too well.
Right.
You go back, I believe it was the 70s, Russell Targ, Ingo Swann, that whole group, the remote viewing experiments, which were successful, that the U.S. government, they had a large program doing that. It was successful, just like you said, at some point it cuts off. The reason, to me, it's quite obvious. The reason being it was successful. And so they cut it out of public view. And it continues to this day, I'm sure.
When you go to look the information of it, when you want to get the public records for it or freedom of information, it's redacted. If it's bullshit, why redact it?
It's all redacted and it's all deeper underground.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, that's when I think it was just around 2018 when I started reading about it and learning more about it. And I saw that they were redacting and withholding. Anytime the government is redacting something, it's because something's working and they don't want the other guys to know about it.
Exactly.
Like the stealth, like, listen, I said this to people all the time. The government needs to have secrets. They need to have it because unfortunately there's other governments that would love nothing more to destroy our way of life. That's just the way it is. So they need it. But on the other side of things, don't point fingers at people and call them crazy because you don't know. We experiment with all sorts of shit. Especially at the government level. Like I said earlier, if a little kid was in a store and he moved something with his mind, do you think his parents are going to celebrate? That kid's getting abducted. The government's taking his kid. Right? Whatever this kid's doing, we need to mass produce this, right?
Yeah. If my son starts doing this thing on the regular, I'm not going to broadcast it. I'll tell you that much. No, I'll encourage him and I'll help him behind the scenes. But I'm not going to go up on Facebook and let people know.
Because some 3-letter acronym's going to be your door. Hey, listen, we're going to borrow the kid indefinitely. Like indefinitely.
Yeah.
What was it? There was a movie I saw when I was a kid. What was it? Daryl. It was a movie called Daryl, right?
I remember Daryl. I saw that too when I was a kid.
And the same scenario, although it was different, he was robotic in a sense. The point is, isolation is the key, right? All right, we put him out there, we tried it out, didn't work out. Isolate. We keep this. We need a secret, and that's the truth. And I think in the next decade, I keep saying this a lot. I say this because now the billionaires have decided to go race to space. Private industry is going up now. And those guys don't give a shit about secrecy. If I said this on other podcasts, if they go up with celebrities and they record UFOs or they find anything like that, that shit's viral. And they're going to make them, they're going to make a show out of it. They'll be on Prime tomorrow. Hey, Reality Aliens on Prime.
It will. Bezos is going to air it. And I'm glad you brought that up. I think that is a key component of the 2017 release of the Tic Tac videos.
I agree.
We're reaching a tipping point where regular people, right now, it's the rich, but actually the barrier to entry isn't that great. There are hundreds and thousands of people, actually, with the amount of money, that can hop on board a Bezos spacecraft at this point. And that barrier to entry is going to get lower and lower and lower. They aren't going to be able to keep the lid on this much longer.
That's why I think they're speeding it up. I think they have no choice now, because you got to and listen, it's so hard for people to comprehend that. If you approach Jeff Bezos and say, look, if you go up there with these people, you got to be quiet about what you see. He's rich. He doesn't give a shit about what you're saying.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah, if Jeff Bezos tomorrow met aliens, the first thing out of his mouth is, how do we get Amazon on your planet?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And here's perhaps one case where the monetization is good, is he's going to see dollar signs.
Oh, of course.
And it's going to get released. Absolutely. We're at the tipping point of technology where they can't keep a lid on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, unfortunately, that's why I say things that you speak about that, you're worried about people criticizing. I think in the next decade, come to first, and then when we get to Neuralink status, forget it. Because then when you combine the consciousness and the subconsciousness and your perception increases, everything we once said impossible, we can now understand and comprehend in real time.
Absolutely.
Lots going to change.
Absolutely. There's a fascinating aspect of the experiencer life, or astral projection, meditation, contact modalities, is that you realize when you're communicating on that telepathic level, secrets disappear. So, for example, when I astrally project, they may show me something and I have a question. They begin to answer that question before it even occurs to me to ask the question.
Right.
Right. That is such a paradigm shift, right?
Agreed.
When you can communicate at that base level like that, and it's not scary, is the interesting thing. It's comforting.
Yeah. I mean, because it's a knowing. And that's why I said, when we get to that point as a species, when we implant that chip and we start looking past the differences and we're communicating with just a knowing, that's when the visitors are going to be like, all right, now it's time to bring them on board, because they're there. They get it. Yeah. They're not going to be, if this whole planet tomorrow, if Russia and Ukraine and America had chips and there was a knowing, and we were able to see past our differences physically, there would be no war. Because we would what would be the point?
Yeah, absolutely. There's living in Japan, there's a iconic Japanese anime here. It's called Neon Genesis Evangelion. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
No. So they have a concept in that anime, and it's called an AT field. They call it the absolute terror field. And what the AT field represents in that anime is this false barrier between people where they are so afraid that if someone can penetrate that barrier and understand your soul, your consciousness, connect the two of you together, it's absolutely terrifying for those that haven't experienced it. And I think there's a lot of people here on Earth, if not most of us, feel that way, feel that, wow, this is a scary thing. If Neuralink becomes, commonplace, and you can read my thoughts and I can read your thoughts, God, how terrifying that will be.
Yeah.
The reality is it's actually not terrifying. And it's probably the most comforting thing we could reach for as a species.
Well, you know who's going to give the pushback on that, right? It's going to be the politicians.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it will destroy the political system. Yeah. And honestly, that's my hope. At some point it does.
Yeah, they're going to be like, wait a minute. They can hear what I'm thinking? No, that shit's not going to work. How do we get rid of this?
Absolutely. If you want to talk true power to the people, that's what power to the people is.
Agreed.
That's dissolving that artificial AT field that sits between us.
They'd have to change the names, right? It'd be We the Species. Because that's what it would come to.
Absolutely. We the collective consciousness.
Why Japan? What made you move to Japan out of curiosity?
Well, in this field, we talk a lot about synchronicities. And I think it was a synchronicity. I think it was probably something I was just destined to do. Upon graduation from university, before entering the workforce, I decided to take a year off and come to Japan. And I'll be quite honest, at the time, I didn't know Japan from China.
Right.
Japan from Thailand. I couldn't pinpoint Japan on a map. I don't know why I chose Japan. I'll be very, very honest. But roundabout, I came to Japan. I spent a year here, and I really enjoyed it. One of the things I enjoy about Japan is that we're about the size of California, but with half the population of the U.S., and we're all centralized in more or less a handful of cities. Very dense population. To me, that's comforting. And it may again go back to the fact that I'm comfortable with that open communication that is possible. So I spent a year here, went back to the States and pursued counseling as I was trained to do. But I ended up spending 1 or 2 vacations a year back here in Japan. Did that for 5 years. And I finally just thought, you know what, I'm going to pull the trigger and I'm going to move to Japan. And I did 14 years ago. Now I have a wife and a son here. One of the reasons I say I think it was a synchronicity is that, and this is just a stupid little story, but just the way the dominoes in my life have fell, I feel like it's relevant. When I was about 19, university student, I brought one of my girlfriends home to meet my mother. And she pulled me aside and she said, Pete, I'll leave the girl's name out. Pete, this girl I think is the one for you. I can see you and her really, I think you and her could go far. Out of nowhere, I said, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. This is one of, it's like the words just came out of my mouth. I said, that's not going to happen. I'm going to marry a Japanese girl. I didn't know any Japanese people at the time, to be quite honest with you. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know where Japan was on the map. But these words came out of my mouth. Even at the time, I thought, what am I talking about? Why would I even say that? But sure enough, years later down the road, I'm married to a Japanese native, and we have a son. I think it was just a synchronicity and part of my destiny, if you will.
You forecasted your own fate.
I did, indeed.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, before we close out, let's tell everyone about your website. I'm going to put it in description as well, but tell everyone about your website and where they can find it. And if there's anything else you want, any other context you want to put out there.
Sure. Yeah. You can find me at petewhitley.org. That's PETEWHITLEY.org. Like I mentioned before, I'm a member of MUFON. We're the largest UFO investigation organization in the world in over 40 countries. I'm the national director here in Japan. I have links to MUFON on my website. I'm also a member of the MUFON Experiencer Resource Team. What we do is when MUFON receives a UFO report that includes human and non-human intelligent contact, they forward the case to us because as a group of about 40 people, we specialize in those cases. I'm a member of that team. There's also a link on my site there. I'm also a part of a small group of Asian UFO researchers, and there's a link to our Facebook page on my website there. Anyone interested in the art of astral projection, please feel free to contact me. Anyone that witnesses a UFO anywhere in the world or has contact with non-human intelligence, please, by all means, contact us at MUFON. And anyone in Asia that is interested in joining us in promoting the research of UFOs and consciousness, extraterrestrial contact in Asia, join us at the Asian UFO Researchers Group.
Excellent. I enjoyed my conversation with you, man, thoroughly.
Likewise, Adam.
So I'm going to be speaking to Peter in post for everyone listening. Good day, good night, good evening, whatever it is for you. And we'll talk to you again.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.